The wine bar glittered with crystal and quiet power. Velvet chairs cradled the city's wealthiest dreamers as they listened to a smooth-talking investor unveil a new energy prototype on a glowing screen. At the back, 23-year-old Olivia Rivers moved silently between tables, her tray steady despite aching arms. She was just a waitress, invisible, until she saw it. The design, the coil structure, the notation in the corner. Her breath caught, her heart stopped. That was her father's invention. She had seen those exact blueprints on his desk before he vanished 10 years ago. Her voice cut through the room like glass. Every head turned as the investor lifted his wineglass. Just as Olivia spoke, "That's my father's invention." The glass slipped. Red wine arced through the air. The wine slid in a crimson arc through the air before crashing into thick linen and scattering across glossy investor notes like blood on marble. The room fell into an almost sacred hush, the kind that only money could command, a silence filled with sharpened breaths and clinking disbelief. Every polished fork froze in mid-air. Every head turned to the waitress who had dared to speak. Olivia Rivers stood by the long walnut table, the tray still hovering in her hands, her black uniform crisp against the soft golden glow of the chandelier overhead. She did not move. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breath, but her eyes never left the glowing screen at the front of the room, where a schematic of sleek coils and energy pathways rotated slowly for the rich and powerful to admire. A moment ago, she had been invisible. Now she was a fire alarm, a breach, a voice no one expected. Gregory Vaughan, the smooth-faced investor in the tailored navy suit, stared at her, his hand still half raised where the wineglass had slipped from his grip. The charm drained from his face like melted wax, leaving something cold and unfamiliar beneath. His guests, the kind who wore watches worth more than Olivia's entire life savings, leaned closer, whispering behind jeweled fingers and tightening ties. The atmosphere, once a symphony of fine jazz and candlelight confidence, had become a stage caught in the middle of a forgotten script. Olivia's lips parted again, her throat dry, but her voice found strength, rising through the weight of polished wealth and well-trained ignorance. Every fiber in her body screamed to retreat, to take it back, to disappear. But something stronger held her in place. The schematic on the screen was not just a blueprint. It was her childhood. It was late nights sitting beside her father as he sketched those curves on napkins. It was coffee rings on his notebook and the smell of soldering iron in the garage. It was the dream he poured himself into before he vanished without a trace. Now it had a new name, a new owner, a new lie, and Olivia was staring straight into it. Around her, the posh surroundings seemed to pulse with tension. Crystal stemware caught fire in the chandelier's reflection. Velvet drapes swayed softly, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Vaughan blinked, slowly lowering his hand, but he said nothing. The guests watched for his cue, like actors awaiting direction. Olivia remained still, her fingers tightened around the tray. Her voice stayed steady, despite the thunder in her chest. It was not just defiance, it was recognition. The screen flickered gently, showing the rotating design again. Each curve was exact. Each line was branded into her memory. Olivia's heart, pounding like war drums beneath her ribs, began to calm, not from fear, but from certainty. She knew what she had seen. She knew what it meant. This was not a mistake. This was theft. And tonight the lie had finally been spoken aloud. Gregory Vaughan blinked again, his jaw tightening as if trying to hold back the chaos rushing behind his eyes. But the damage was already done. His polished smile, once so effortless and rehearsed, collapsed beneath the weight of Olivia's words. He stood there, with a napkin crumpled in one hand, the other trembling just enough for the nearest guests to notice. The heavy crystal wineglass now lay in pieces beside his $1,000 shoes, and the rich Merlot was soaking into the embroidered linen like blood into snow. All eyes were on him, but it was Olivia who held the power in the room now. Her gaze didn't waver as Vaughan finally found his voice, strained and cracking, asking in a flat tone who she was and what she was talking about. Olivia answered without flinching. Her voice was clear, not loud, but it carried like a stone skipping across still water. She told him her name. She told them the truth. The schematic projected behind him was her father's. Her words sliced through the room with surgical precision. The crowd gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others whispered to each other, phones now subtly raised, capturing the scene in short, breathless clips. Vaughan's fingers curled tighter around the silk napkin as if it could anchor him, but his other hand knocked over the water glass. It shattered as it hit the edge of the table, sending ice skittering across the floor. One woman at the far end yelped. The illusion of perfection, control, and poise shattered with it. Vaughan tried to recover, turning back to the projected design and mumbling about development teams and parallel discoveries, but no one was listening. Olivia watched him, her heart still pounding, but now steadied by the strange quiet inside her. Something in his face had shifted, not just anger or embarrassment. It was fear. Real, bone-deep fear. The kind that only guilty men wore when truth cracked the surface. A suited aide rushed forward, whispering in Vaughan's ear, but his eyes stayed fixed on Olivia like she had just risen from the dead. He gestured sharply. Security moved. Two men in black stepped toward her, polite but firm, hands out. Olivia turned slowly, handing over her tray with grace, refusing to let them see the shake in her limbs. She didn't resist. She didn't beg. She walked out on her own, each step echoing through the marble hall, leaving a trail of silence in her wake. Behind her, voices began to rise. Questions flew like darts. The wine-stained table, the ruined pitch, the girl with the truth. Outside, as the doors shut behind her and the city air bit cold against her skin, Olivia let her breath go in one long stream. The golden glow of the buildings still burned behind her, but she no longer belonged in that room. She had cracked something open, not just in Vaughan, in herself. And now, nothing would be the same again. Rain slid down the stone steps like tears as Olivia stood in her black flats at the foot of the private club, the weight of the world pressing against her chest. The velvet rope that once separated her from wealth and exclusivity now hung lifeless at her back, as meaningless as the smile Vaughan had worn moments before. Her uniform clung to her skin, damp and threadbare. Her apron balled in one hand, the other wrapped tightly around her middle to quiet the trembling. She was no longer just a waitress, not to them, not to herself. Inside that opulent chamber of polished brass and gilded lies, she had said something she could never take back. The manager had caught her at the staff door, his expression a cold blend of polished courtesy and legal caution. He informed her in low tones that her employment had been terminated effective immediately. No severance, no references. No entry allowed into the club again for any reason. The rain soaked through her flats and chilled her to the bone. But she stayed on the steps for another few breaths, watching the world she had been thrown out of. The interior glowed through the windows in soft amber light, all elegance and soft jazz, untouched by truth, untouched by her. Behind the glass, Vaughan's team scrambled to regain control. Guests were ushered toward dessert and cocktails. The servers rushed to replace linens and silence whispers. The performance resumed. But Olivia had shattered the illusion, and now she stood outside, soaked and alone, exiled from the only job keeping her afloat. Her fingers itched, not from cold, but from restraint, from everything she had wanted to say but hadn't. A city bus rumbled past, splashing gutter water near her feet. She turned, shoulders squared, jaw tight, and began walking. The glittering avenues of wealth gave way to cracked sidewalks and flickering street lamps. As she walked, the rain masked her tears. The pain of humiliation and fear churned in her gut, not just because she had lost her job, but because she had poked the giant. She had named something sacred, stolen, and now she would pay for it. She passed a line of black cars outside another venue, another glass tower lit from within. Places she had only ever entered through service doors. Suddenly the chasm between her world and theirs felt like a canyon carved in stone. But even through the fog of uncertainty, something steadier than fear began to grow. She had seen Vaughan's face, his panic, his disbelief. That design was her father's, and Vaughan had known it. The moment her voice spoke that truth, he had seen a ghost. She reached her building just as thunder rolled overhead. She looked up at the cracked sign. The worn bricks. The light in her window. Her home, humble and heavy with survival. She wiped her face, lifted her chin, and climbed the stairs. She had lost her job, yes, but she had also started something she could not stop, and tomorrow the real storm would begin. Inside the narrow apartment that sat above a shuttered bakery on East Harmon Street, the air smelled faintly of lavender detergent and hospital-grade antiseptic, a scent Olivia had grown used to over the past 8 years. The moment she stepped through the chipped green door, the rain still dripping from her hair, her younger brother Elijah turned his head from the couch, his face lighting up with cautious joy before fading as he saw the expression she wore. He sat propped up with pillows, his legs wrapped in a quilt their mother had sewn long before the accident, the television casting a soft glow across his thin frame. Olivia didn't speak at first. She dropped her apron on the small kitchen counter, peeled off her damp shoes, and sat beside him. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the television and the distant patter of rain against the single-pane windows. She finally turned to him and told him everything. About the pitch, the schematic, Vaughan's face, the broken wine glass, the silence, and the security guards who escorted her out as if she were the threat. Elijah listened with wide eyes, absorbing each detail like a sponge. He had always believed in their father, always said the truth would surface. Now it had cracked the surface and poured out like rain. Olivia's voice shook as she described the moment she knew without doubt that the blueprint Vaughan had showcased was not just familiar, but exact. She told Elijah it was their father's invention, the same lines, The same curve at the top of the energy loop, the same signature markings he had once shown them when they were kids. Elijah's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of fierce pride. He reached for her hand, weak but steady, and told her she did the right thing, even if it cost them everything. His words stilled the fear in her chest. For years they had survived on her tips and double shifts, their father's name spoken only in memories and soft reassurances. But now it was more than memory. It was a legacy buried under lies. She looked around the apartment, the cracked ceiling, the stack of medical bills beside Elijah's chair, the shelf of old textbooks and half-burnt candles they used during outages. This was what she was fighting for. Not just justice for their father, but a life where Elijah didn't have to suffer in silence, where their survival didn't depend on her serving cocktails to men who stole other people's futures. That night, as he slept in the next room, Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor beside a plastic storage bin she hadn't opened in years. She pried open the lid, her fingers trembling, and pulled out the old journals wrapped in a worn towel. Her father's handwriting greeted her like a voice calling from the past. She turned a page, then another. Diagrams, calculations, notes about field stability and sustainable conversion ratios. Then she saw it. A sketch, crude but clear, the exact design from Vaughn's screen. And in that moment, sitting on the cold linoleum floor of a forgotten apartment, Olivia felt the smallest flicker of power. Her father had not vanished. He had been erased. And now she was going to rewrite him back into the world. The soft rustle of pages was the only sound in the apartment as the night deepened and the rain eased into a quiet drizzle outside. Olivia sat hunched over a blanket spread across the living room floor, surrounded by stacks of her father's journals, the faint yellow light from the kitchen casting long shadows that danced across the faded carpet. Each page she turned brought a flood of memory. His voice explaining the science behind energy fields, the way he would draw tiny lightning bolts beside ideas he was excited about, the way he signed his name with a deliberate flourish, confident and proud. Her fingers traced the familiar loops of his signature like a relic she never expected to see again. She found diagrams that mirrored the one from Vaughn's pitch in heartbreaking detail, not just similar, identical, down to the configuration of the fusion chamber and the shape of the containment coils. He had written notes in the margins about refining the efficiency, and a line she had seen etched into his work since childhood. The future must belong to everyone. Olivia pressed her hand to the page, eyes brimming. It was his, no question, and it had been stolen. She turned to the final journal in the stack, a thinner one with a cracked leather cover and her father's initials pressed into the corner. The last entry was dated 10 years ago, only 3 days before he vanished. Her hands shook as she read the words. He had written about a meeting with Gregory Vaughan, about sharing his progress reluctantly after months of persuasion. But the tone of the entry shifted midway. His handwriting grew erratic. He mentioned feeling watched, feeling unsafe, that he had trusted the wrong person, that he needed to make copies and prepare for what was coming. Then the entry ended abruptly. No sign-off. No last words. Just a line drawn hastily under the final paragraph. Olivia stared at the page, the silence in the room becoming heavy. Her father hadn't just disappeared. Something had happened, and Vaughan had been there. She clutched the journal to her chest and let the weight of it settle in. This wasn't just about intellectual theft, it was about betrayal. It was about fear. Maybe even about silencing someone who knew too much. Her mind raced with questions. Why hadn't he gone to the press? Why hadn't anyone helped him? Had he tried? Had Vaughn made sure he couldn't? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She looked around the apartment again, at the fragile world she had built on the ruins of her father's absence. The time for fear had passed. She folded the journals carefully, packed them into a satchel, and looked toward the small bedroom where Elijah slept. Tomorrow, she would do more than speak. Tomorrow, she would act. Her father had left behind the truth, and now Olivia was going to carry it into the light. In the dim glow of the early morning, Olivia sat on the edge of the old couch, her thoughts spiraling through memory and fear, until one moment came into focus with startling clarity. She was 9 years old, cross-legged on the kitchen floor with a bowl of cereal balanced in her lap, watching her father scribble frantically on the back of a cereal box. He had run out of paper, but the idea could not wait. His eyes gleamed with excitement as he explained the purpose of magnetic field loops and clean energy in words too complex for her young mind to fully grasp. But his voice was filled with such hope that she smiled anyway. He had promised her that someday his work would change everything, and then he was gone. Now, more than a decade later, that same sketch he had drawn in front of her appeared on a massive screen at a pitch hosted by the man she suspected had betrayed him. The memory struck Olivia like a bolt of lightning, cutting through the fear and uncertainty that had been building since the night before. Her father's last journal entry was more than a warning. It was a goodbye he never got to say. She looked at the journals spread across the small coffee table, pages still open like silent witnesses to a truth long buried. Her hands trembled as she reached for the cracked leather cover again, rereading the section about Vaughn. The words felt like a whisper from the grave, a call to action she could no longer ignore. The rain had stopped, and outside the streets began to stir with the slow, early shuffle of city life. Olivia pulled her jacket tight around her and stepped out into the chilled morning. The building across the street, a faded grey structure that once housed a corner market, now displayed a sign for rent in the window. Beneath it, a memory flickered of her father walking hand in hand with her and Elijah, talking about how that building would make the perfect neighborhood energy hub. The dream was gone, but the proof wasn't. Back inside, Olivia moved with purpose. She repacked the journals into her satchel, folded a towel around the most fragile notes, and pulled out the business card her father had once received from a visiting professor named Dr. Leland Shaw. The name had appeared in one of the journal entries, scribbled beside the words, "Trust him." It was a long shot, but it was all she had. She searched for his name online, discovering he was now a senior faculty member at the same university where her father had once taught. Her heart pounded. Maybe Shaw would remember. Maybe he would know the truth. Maybe he could help. She wrote down the address and took a deep breath. Then she looked at the final page of her father's journal one more time. A smeared line across the bottom read, "Build without fear." Olivia closed the book gently. Fear had ruled long enough. The gates of the private club loomed in front of Olivia like a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she still refused to surrender. The polished brass letters above the entrance gleamed in the midday sun as valids in tailored uniforms rushed to open doors for luxury cars that purred to a halt at the curb. She stood just beyond the velvet rope, dressed in a clean blouse and the same black slacks from her waitress uniform, her hair tied back tightly to keep her resolve from unraveling. In her hands she held the leather journal, her fingers curled protectively around the edge like it was armor. She had not come to beg for her job, she had come to speak, to tell the truth, and to be seen. Her voice had cracked Vaughn's mask once, she was ready to crack it again. She stepped forward and called out, loud enough to draw glances but not loud enough to shout. A few guests turned, curious. The doorman, a tall man with the poise of a hired statue, moved quickly to intercept her. He asked her to leave, his voice calm but forceful. She refused. She raised the journal above her head and told everyone within earshot that Gregory Vaughan had stolen her father's work, that the design he presented was not his own, that her father had vanished after trusting him. The moment hung in the air, brittle with tension. A pair of reporters from a small media outlet nearby watched from the sidewalk, whispering to each other, unsure if this was drama or madness. Olivia looked to them, desperation flashing in her eyes, and repeated herself. She told them about the journals, the matching design, the meeting her father wrote about, the men who erased him. She waited for them to step forward, but they didn't. One of them raised a camera briefly, then lowered it again and shook his head. They had seen too many stories like hers that led nowhere. They needed more than claims. They needed power. Vaughan's power had already written her off as unstable, as disgruntled, as background noise. The doorman's voice turned colder, warning her again to leave. When she still refused, he called for security. 2 guards stepped out from the shadows, not roughly, but with clear intent. Olivia backed away slowly, heart pounding with frustration and humiliation. Again the velvet rope closed behind her, again the city swallowed her whole. As she turned to leave, her reflection caught in the glass doors. For a second, she saw herself not as a waitress or a daughter or a girl begging to be heard, but as a fuse, lit and sparking. She clutched the journal tighter, the sting of rejection burning deeper than the wind on her face. The system was built to protect men like Vaughan. It would not fall from her voice alone, but it would shake if she found the right hands to pass the truth to. She didn't need them to believe her yet. She just needed someone who would listen. The campus sat like a sleeping monument to minds that shaped the world, its ivy-wrapped towers and wrought-iron gates guarding halls filled with knowledge and ego in equal measure. Olivia stepped onto the grounds with the worn satchel slung over her shoulder, her father's journal tucked safely inside. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a warning drum, but she moved forward, past marble statues and curated lawns toward the physics building her father once walked through with hope in his eyes. The receptionist in the front office looked up at her with polite disinterest until Olivia mentioned Dr. Leland Shaw. A pause followed. The receptionist hesitated, said the professor was retired but still kept an office on the top floor. No appointments, no guarantees. Olivia thanked her and took the stairs, one at a time, each creaking step a quiet rebellion against the fear rising in her throat. When she reached the top floor, she found the door unmarked except for a faded nameplate and a paper taped over the slot that read, "Do not disturb." She knocked anyway, nothing. She knocked again, harder. This time, footsteps shuffled behind the door, and it opened just wide enough to reveal an old man with deep-set eyes and hair like wind-swept snow. He looked at her, irritated and tired, asking what she wanted. Olivia introduced herself. When she said the name Rivers, something shifted in his gaze. Recognition, ghosts. He opened the door and let her in without another word. The office was a relic of genius in disarray. Stacks of paper towered beside chalkboards etched with formulas. Old books sagged on crooked shelves, and a desk lamp flickered over half-solved problems abandoned in their prime. She handed him the journal and waited. He sat in silence as he opened it, flipping slowly through the pages, his hands shaking slightly as if handling a holy text. Then he stopped at the schematic, his breath caught. He ran his fingers over the lines. He looked up at Olivia with something close to awe, then sorrow. He told her he had warned her father not to trust Gregory Vaughan, that Vaughan was never interested in the science, only the profit, that he had a gift for manipulation and saw Robert Rivers not as a partner but as a resource. Dr. Shaw's voice cracked as he said Robert was the most brilliant physicist he had ever known. He confirmed that the design Vaughan now claimed as his legacy had been sketched by Robert nearly a year before the company was founded. Olivia's heart pounded louder now, not in fear but in revelation. Then Shaw reached into a drawer, hesitating only a moment before pulling out a small metal flash drive. He said Robert had sent it to him, asking him to keep it safe, just in case. Just in case, he vanished. The professor placed it in Olivia's palm and closed her fingers around it. You may be the only one left who can do something with this. And in that quiet office full of dust and memory, Olivia knew the silence was ending. Olivia left the university with the flash drive pressed tightly in her pocket, the weight of it feeling heavier than the journals in her satchel, heavier than the years of silence she had carried alone. She took the train back to the city, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks sounding like a countdown. When she returned to the apartment, Elijah was waiting at the window, his face etched with anticipation. She told him everything, every word Dr. Leland Shaw had said, every crack in the wall of lies surrounding their father's disappearance. Then, with trembling hands, she inserted the flash drive into the battered old laptop they shared. The screen flickered, loading a folder labeled simply Legacy. Inside were hundreds of files. Scanned blueprints, video logs, time-stamped emails, technical data. The earliest schematic dated back 12 years, long before Vaughan filed any patent. Olivia scrolled through one file after another, her father's name printed on each document. Some were rough, others refined, but all carried the same vision, clean, accessible energy. And all bore proof that Robert Rivers was the original mind behind what the world now believed was Vaughan's invention. A folder labeled Correspondence caught her eye. Inside, dozens of emails between her father and Vaughan stretched across years. The early ones were warm, filled with collaboration and trust. But as time passed, the tone shifted. Vaughan grew colder, more impatient, demanding. Then came the final email, a warning from Robert. He feared Vaughan was preparing to cut him out, that he had shared too much too soon, that he no longer felt safe. Olivia read the lines over and over, her jaw clenched, heart aching. There, in black and white, was the truth. Her father had seen the betrayal coming but hadn't known how to stop it, until he vanished. She opened one final file, a video. The screen filled with the familiar face of a man with tired eyes but a hopeful smile. Her father. He sat at his workbench, surrounded by coils and circuitry, speaking into the camera. He said that if anyone was watching this, he had likely failed to stop what was coming, that his invention was never meant to be owned by one man, that science belonged to everyone, and that Olivia, his daughter, had the heart to finish what he started. She pressed a hand over her mouth as tears ran freely down her cheeks. Elijah watched in silence, eyes wide with reverence. They weren't alone anymore. They had proof. They had a voice. The flash drive held more than evidence. It held her father's last will in motion, his final stand. And now, Olivia knew what she had to do. She would not beg for acknowledgement. She would expose the truth. The lies were built on silence. She was going to be the noise that shattered them. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. The downtown newsroom buzzed with a low hum of clicking keyboards and murmured phone calls as Olivia stepped through the glass doors of a mid-sized media outlet known more for its local exposés than national headlines. She had sent out dozens of messages to journalists, activists, and science publications, and only one had responded. Riya Patel, a sharp-eyed reporter with a reputation for chasing truth, even when it got her in trouble with sponsors. Olivia found her hunched over a desk cluttered with sticky notes, a steaming mug of tea balanced dangerously close to her laptop. When Olivia introduced herself and explained the situation, Riya looked unimpressed at first, clearly used to people with stories that fell apart under the smallest scrutiny. But when Olivia pulled out the journal, the flash drive, and the printed email threads, everything changed. Ria's fingers froze above her keyboard. She asked questions, rapid and precise. How long had Olivia had the journals? How had she gotten the flash drive? Who else knew? Olivia answered everything with calm conviction, her voice low but unshakable. Riya opened the files, scrolling through the time-stamped blueprints, the scanned letters, the emails laced with betrayal. Her skepticism melted into focused intensity. This was more than a story. This was a scandal that could unravel a legacy. As Riya scrolled further, she saw the video. Robert Rivers speaking to the future with quiet strength. When the footage ended, Riya leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowed. "This is nuclear," she whispered, "but it's not enough." She explained that if they wanted to expose Gregory Vaughan, they needed more than technical data. They needed a human element, a whistleblower, a witness, someone who had seen the shift happen from inside Vaughan's world. Olivia told her about the engineer named Mark Duval. He used to work for Vaughan. She remembered his name from a document in the journals, a name written beside a note that read, "Trust questionable." Riya began digging, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up archived staff records and cross-referencing employment histories. After an hour, she found him. Mark Duval, now running a small repair shop in a quiet suburb 2 hours away. They arranged to visit the next morning. As night fell, Riya cleared a corner of her desk and handed Olivia a spare cot in the break room. They would work through the night, preparing questions, reviewing files, and drafting outlines for the story. The newsroom slowly emptied, but the light at Riya's desk stayed on. In that warm glow, surrounded by coffee cups, open laptops, and quiet resolve, Olivia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anger, but momentum. She wasn't shouting into the void anymore. She had found someone who could amplify her voice, someone who believed her. And as they sketched the first draft of the article on a whiteboard beside them, the name Robert Rivers stood tall in red marker. His story was rising. Finally. The morning sun broke through the city haze as Olivia and Riya boarded the first outbound train, the satchel resting on Olivia's lap like a sacred artifact. They sat in silence, the rhythmic clatter beneath them syncing with the pounding in Olivia's chest. When they arrived in the quiet suburb, the mood shifted from urgent to heavy. The streets were lined with modest homes and sleepy storefronts, and tucked between a diner and a laundromat sat Duval Repairs, its windows dusty and its sign faded. Inside, a bell chimed softly as they entered, and the scent of machine oil and old plastic filled the air. Mark Duval looked up from behind the counter, his hands buried in a half-disassembled toaster, his eyes wary and sunken. He was older than the photos they had found, his shoulders stooped and his expression guarded. Rhea introduced them calmly, identifying herself as a journalist and Olivia as the daughter of Robert Rivers. The name hit him like a blow. He dropped the screwdriver, his eyes locked on Olivia's face. Silence stretched between them until Olivia pulled out the schematic and laid it on the counter. Duval stared at it as if he were seeing a ghost. He sat down slowly, his hands trembling, and after a long breath began to speak. He said he had worked directly under Vaughn in the early days, that he had seen Robert's designs, had watched as Vaughn manipulated meetings, shifted narratives, and slowly isolated Robert from the company he helped build. Mark said they were told Robert had stepped away voluntarily, but he knew it was a lie. He had kept his mouth shut to keep his job, to protect his family, but the guilt had never left. He glanced around the shop like someone still afraid of being watched. Olivia reached across the counter and placed her hand gently over his. She wasn't angry. She just needed the truth. Duval nodded, stood, and disappeared into the back room. He returned with a worn folder, yellowed with age, and handed it to Rhea. Inside were internal memos, original drafts of design schematics with Robert's name in the margins, and notes Duval had secretly copied before they were erased from the official record. He whispered that Vaughn had made them destroy or falsify files, and those who resisted were pushed out quietly. Some took severance, others took silence. He had taken fear, until now. Rhea asked if he would go on record. He hesitated, then nodded. His voice was shaky but firm as he gave his statement into her recorder. A man broken by regret, finally reclaiming his piece of the truth. Olivia thanked him, her eyes wet but proud. As they left the shop, the folder tucked tightly into Rhea's satchel. The sky opened above them. Sunlight poured through the clouds like a promise. They had a voice from inside Vaughn's empire now, a witness, a key. The truth was no longer trapped in silence. It was moving forward, one piece at a time. By the time Olivia and Rhea returned to the city, the air had shifted. The rain was gone, replaced by a strange, tense stillness that seemed to press against Olivia's skin as if the world itself were holding its breath. They had the folder, the files, the recorded testimony. It was enough to build something real. But as Olivia pushed open the door to her apartment that evening, her heart dropped into her stomach. The door frame was splintered, the lock hanging broken, and inside, chaos waited. Her bookshelf had been overturned. The journals she had so carefully catalogued were scattered across the floor, pages torn and trampled. The kitchen drawers were yanked open, cabinets left hanging, yet nothing was stolen. Not the old television, not Elijah's medication, not even the small envelope of emergency cash hidden in a drawer. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message, a warning. Elijah stood frozen in the hallway, his face pale and tight with fear. Olivia moved through the wreckage, her breath ragged. She fell to her knees, gathering the journals, checking for missing pages. Her hands shook with fury and dread. They had been watching. Vaughn's people, his legal team, his shadow network of influence. They knew she was getting close. Elijah spoke her name, his voice small and trembling, asking if they were safe. She crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped her arms around him, holding him like she had when they were children hiding from storms. But this was no storm. This was deliberate, controlled, designed to shake them, and it nearly did. But as she held him, a different fire began to rise. Olivia stood slowly, her hands still gripping the torn leather cover of her father's journal. She looked around the apartment, the broken lock, the pages on the floor, and then at the flash drive still safe inside her bag. They hadn't found it. They hadn't stopped her. Not yet. And they wouldn't. Elijah, his voice steadier now, reached out and handed her something she had missed in the mess, a framed photo that had fallen behind the couch. It was old, sun-bleached, a picture of the 3 of them at her father's lab, all smiles and sunlight, and, in the corner of the frame, barely visible, sat the prototype, the same device from the schematic. Right there in the background, Olivia stared at it, then at Elijah, and something inside her clicked. Proof, visual, tangible, dated, hidden in plain sight. She took a breath, then another. The fear was still there, thick and sharp, but it was being replaced by something colder, harder. Resolve. Vaughn's people could send threats. They could tear apart her home, but they couldn't unwrite the truth. And now she had one more piece of it. She stood tall, clutching the photo to her chest. The game had changed. This wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about survival. And she wasn't backing down. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, the kind of morning where the air itself seemed to carry secrets. Olivia barely slept, her mind replaying the break-in over and over until anger became her armor. She arrived at the newsroom early, clutching the damaged photo and her father's journals like a soldier carrying weapons into battle. Ria was already there, typing furiously, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her monitor. When Olivia set the photograph on her desk, Ria froze, leaning in close. There it was. Proof. The prototype clearly visible beside Robert Rivers, its unique coil structure identical to the one in Vaughn's promotional material. It was time. Together, they organized every piece of evidence. Duval's recorded confession, the digital blueprints from the flash drive, the emails, the time-stamped video, and now the photograph. Ria assembled it into a cohesive narrative, typing each line with precision and fury. Olivia read over her shoulder, her heart thrumming with both fear and exhilaration. This was it. The truth was no longer buried. It was alive on the page. That afternoon, they published the article. The headline stretched across the front page of the outlet's website, "The Stolen Light." The article told the story of Robert Rivers, the visionary scientist who vanished after being betrayed by his partner, Gregory Vaughn. It laid out evidence piece by piece, every image, every document, every quote meticulously placed. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Major outlets picked it up. Scientists began sharing the evidence, corroborating details, questioning the legitimacy of Vaughn's patents. Hashtags filled the feeds, and Olivia's name climbed the trending lists. The narrative was no longer controlled by Vaughn's empire. It belonged to the people now. But the celebration was short-lived. By evening, Vaughn's legal team struck back with surgical precision. A press release went out from his corporation calling the story fabricated, the evidence stolen, and Olivia Rivers, a mentally unstable former employee seeking attention. The statement was accompanied by a lawsuit for defamation and corporate theft, filed against both Olivia and the publication. The newsroom buzzed with tension as lawyers filled Ria's office. The editor tried to calm Olivia, telling her this was normal, expected, even necessary. That truth always met resistance before acceptance. But Olivia's stomach churned. She thought of Elijah alone in their apartment and of the silent power Vaughn wielded. Fear began to creep in again, whispering that maybe she had gone too far. Then Ria placed a steady hand on her shoulder and told her to look outside. Across the street, people were gathering, students, reporters, and strangers holding signs that read, "Science belongs to everyone." They weren't alone anymore. Olivia took a breath, steadying herself. Vaughn could bury them in lawsuits, smear campaigns, and intimidation. But the truth was out now. It had taken root. And some things, once unearthed, never go back underground. The courthouse gleamed beneath the morning sun, its white marble steps reflecting light like a stage set for judgment. Olivia stood at the bottom of those steps in a plain navy suit borrowed from a friend, her hands clasped tightly around a worn folder. The nerves in her chest pulsed like electricity, but she lifted her chin and climbed, one measured step at a time. Inside, the corridors buzzed with reporters and cameras, the air thick with whispers of scandal. Gregory Vaughn arrived moments later, surrounded by attorneys and assistants in matching suits, his confident stride cutting through the noise. He looked exactly as he always had in interviews, polished, untouchable, smiling for the cameras. But when his eyes met Olivia's across the marble lobby, that smile faltered. The trial began with Vaughn's lawyers attacking first. They painted Olivia as a delusional former employee clinging to her father's memory. They called her evidence circumstantial, her witnesses unreliable, her motivations emotional. Olivia sat silent, her heart a stone in her chest, but she never broke her gaze from Vaughn. When it was her turn, Ria's legal team presented everything they had gathered: the blueprints, the flash drive, the emails, the photograph of the prototype, the video of Robert Rivers. Each piece landed like a blow. The courtroom murmured as experts confirmed the timestamps on the designs predated Vaughn's patent filings. Then came the turning point. The door opened at the back of the courtroom, and Dr. Leland Shaw entered, walking slowly but with unmistakable purpose. Vaughn's confident mask cracked for the first time. He shifted in his seat, gripping the edge of the table as Shaw took the stand. The old professor's voice trembled only slightly as he swore under oath and identified the original designs as Robert Rivers's work. He testified that Vaughn had visited the university years before, soliciting investors using data that Robert had created. Each question from the defense made him stronger, his guilt over years of silence fueling his conviction now. When Ria played Duval's recorded testimony next, the dam broke completely. The jury watched in silence as Duval confessed to altering files and destroying records under Vaughn's orders. Vaughn's face drained of color. He tried to interject, muttering that it was a lie, that he had been framed, that he was the true visionary. His voice cracked, his composure dissolved. The entire room saw it. For years he had been a master of appearances, but in that moment his mask of power fell away, revealing what he truly was, a frightened man cornered by the truth. The judge ordered forensic analysis of the patents, and the results confirmed what Olivia already knew. The data traced back to Robert Rivers's original timestamps. It was undeniable. The courtroom erupted in whispers as Vaughan slumped into his chair, defeated. Olivia sat frozen, tears pooling in her eyes. For the first time, the silence did not feel heavy. It felt clean, liberating. Justice had found its footing, and she had helped guide it there. The day of the verdict felt unreal, the courthouse thrumming with tension as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Olivia sat at the plaintiff's table beside Rhea and the legal team, her palms pressed together to keep them from shaking. The jury had been out for only 3 hours, but each minute stretched like an eternity. Across the aisle, Gregory Vaughan whispered harshly to his lawyers, his once slick composure fractured into impatience and fear. The judge entered. The murmurs died instantly. Everyone rose, and the sound of the bailiff's voice declaring order echoed through the room. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat louder than anything else. The foreman stood, a middle-aged woman with steady eyes, holding a folded sheet of paper. The silence that followed was so complete it felt holy. The foreman read the verdict. Gregory Vaughan was found guilty on all counts: intellectual property, theft, fraud, and witness tampering. The words landed like thunder in Olivia's chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Around her, gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by a low murmur of astonishment. Vaughan's lawyers collapsed into silence. The man himself sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with disbelief as though the universe had suddenly betrayed him. The judge ordered the immediate transfer of ownership for all disputed patents to the rightful heir, Olivia Rivers. A wave of sound broke loose. Reporters whispered into phones. Flashbulbs burst. Rhea gripped Olivia's shoulder, whispering that it was over, that they had done it. But Olivia hardly heard her. The words still echoed in her mind. She had won, not for herself, but for her father. For Elijah, for truth. She stood slowly, her legs trembling as if she were learning how to walk again. The courtroom blurred around her as tears welled up and finally spilled over. Across the aisle, Vaughan turned toward her, his face drained of color, and for the first time she saw him without the armor of wealth and power. He looked small, defeated. A man undone by the very ambition he worshipped. As the bailiffs escorted him away, he glanced back at her once, a flicker of hatred still lingering, but it didn't touch her. She had nothing left to fear. The judge's gavel struck, and the sound reverberated through the chamber like the closing of a long, painful chapter. Outside, the courthouse steps were a storm of reporters and flashing cameras, their questions colliding in a blur of voices. Olivia paused at the top of the steps, looking out at the city bathed in sunlight. She didn't give a statement. She didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. She descended the stairs, each step lighter than the last, as if shedding years of grief. When she reached the bottom, Rhea caught up, smiling through tears. Olivia turned toward her and said softly that the fight was never just about justice. It was about light, her father's light, and now it was shining again. The scandal rippled through the world like a shockwave, dismantling Gregory Vaughan's empire piece by piece, as if the very foundation of his wealth had been built on sand. Within days, investors pulled out, board members resigned, and the media flooded every screen with headlines about the man who had stolen a dream. Olivia watched it unfold from the quiet of her apartment, the hum of Elijah's medical equipment filling the background like a steady heartbeat. For years, that sound had been a reminder of limitation. Now it was a rhythm of hope. The verdict had given her more than justice. It had given her the future her father once spoke about when she was a child, sitting on his workbench, surrounded by circuits and blueprints. Offers came in waves, from universities, corporations, and energy conglomerates, all wanting to partner, to buy, to claim a piece of what Robert Rivers had created. But Olivia turned them all down. Profit had already poisoned her father's vision once. It would not happen again. She began drawing up plans for something different, something purer. The Rivers Institute, a non-profit research foundation dedicated to advancing clean, accessible energy under ethical standards that no company could corrupt. Ria helped her draft the proposal, calling in favors from every honest contact she had left in journalism and academia. Dr. Leland Shaw agreed to act as senior advisor, guiding the scientific direction of the project. Duval, finally unburdened from guilt, volunteered his skills to reconstruct the prototype from Robert's original schematics. Even Elijah found his place, managing the digital archives from home, ensuring his father's work would remain transparent and accessible to anyone with the passion to learn. When the institute was announced, the ceremony took place inside an old Art Deco building that once housed a power company, its marble floors and brass fixtures polished back to their original splendor. The air shimmered with anticipation as scientists, students, and community leaders filled the hall. Olivia stood before them in a simple cream suit, her hair pinned back, the pendant from her Waitress days still hanging at her neck. Her voice trembled at first as she began to speak, but soon it steadied, resonant and full. She told them that light belonged to everyone, that knowledge without compassion was just another kind of darkness, and that her father's dream had never been about power, but about possibility. The crowd rose to their feet in applause, not just for the words, but for what they represented: redemption, renewal, truth reborn. As the evening ended, Olivia stepped aside, watching people laugh and talk under the chandeliers, the same kind of chandeliers that once hung over her while she served drinks to the powerful. But now she was no longer invisible. She was the light-bearer, the daughter of a stolen dream returned home to finish it. The grand hall of the Rivers Institute shimmered with golden light as Olivia stood at the podium, her reflection faintly visible in the polished marble beneath her feet. The crowd before her was a living tapestry of faces from every corner of science, industry, and media, all gathered to witness a new beginning born from truth. The air hummed with excitement, the same electric energy her father once described when a great discovery was about to unfold. Olivia took a slow breath, steadying her heart as she looked toward the front row. Elijah sat there, proud and upright in his wheelchair, his eyes shining brighter than the cameras that captured every angle of her moment. Ria stood beside him, her arms crossed, her smile fierce and protective. Dr. Leland Shaw was there too, his cane resting against his knee, watching her like a man who had finally found peace. Olivia adjusted the microphone and began to speak. Her voice carried softly at first, but the room leaned in to hear her. She thanked those who had fought beside her, those who had believed when it was dangerous to do so, and those who had stood silent for too long but had now chosen to step into the light. She spoke of her father, of the nights he had spent chasing the promise of clean, limitless energy, and of the way he taught her that science and morality must always walk hand in hand. As she spoke, her words wove through the air like a quiet anthem. She reminded them that truth was not owned, it was shared. That invention meant nothing if it did not serve humanity. and that every breakthrough carried a moral cost that must be paid in integrity, not in gold. The applause came in waves, but she did not pause for it. She ended her speech with a single statement from her father's journal, one she had memorized long ago. The future belongs to those who build it with integrity. The room erupted. The sound filled every corner of the hall until it was no longer noise but pure emotion. Olivia looked down for a moment, overwhelmed, then smiled through her tears. She stepped away from the podium and joined Elijah, who reached out and took her hand. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of brother and sister framed by the Institute's emblem behind them, a rising sun above an open book. As the crowd continued to cheer, Olivia leaned down and whispered that this was just the beginning. Outside the tall windows, the city glittered against the night, every light a symbol of what was possible when truth triumphed over greed. And for the first time in her life, Olivia felt not like a waitress serving someone else's world, but like the architect of her own. The night after the grand opening, the city seemed quieter than usual, as if the world itself were pausing to exhale. Olivia stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the Rivers Institute, overlooking the skyline that shimmered like a sea of liquid gold. The air was cool, scented faintly with rain and jasmine from the planters that lined the terrace walls. Below her, the building pulsed with life. Through the tall windows, she could see scientists unpacking equipment, interns laughing as they carried boxes, and technicians calibrating machines. It was all real now. The dream her father had once described by the flicker of a desk lamp was breathing again. She placed her hands on the railing, staring toward the horizon where the city lights met the stars, and whispered her father's name softly into the wind. A gentle peace settled over her. The chaos, the fear, the sleepless nights, all of it had led to this moment of stillness. Behind her, the terrace door creaked open, and Rhea stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Olivia without a word, and leaned beside her on the railing. They stood in silence, letting the hum of the city fill the space between them. Then Rhea spoke quietly, saying that stories like theirs did not end. They echoed, shaping the ones that came after. Olivia nodded, her gaze distant but steady. She told Rhea she sometimes wondered if her father knew this would happen, if he had seen beyond his own despair to believe that one day his children would finish what he started. Rhea smiled and said that vision like his never truly dies. It only waits to be remembered. Olivia looked down at the Institute again, watching the new generation of scientists building, dreaming, discovering. She thought of the girl she had been, the one who carried trays through glittering rooms filled with people who never saw her. That girl had believed her voice was too small to matter. Tonight she knew better. Truth had made her visible. She took a sip of the coffee, its warmth grounding her, then turned her eyes upward to the stars. Somewhere beyond that sky was the same light her father once promised her would change the world. She could almost hear his voice telling her to keep going. Rhea set her empty mug down and began to head inside, but Olivia stayed, letting the wind sweep through her hair. The lights of the city blurred slightly as she blinked back tears, not of grief, but of gratitude. She had found her way out of the dark and built something that would outlast her. The night stretched endlessly before her, vast and full of promise, and for the first time, Olivia truly believed that the future belonged to the honest hands that dared to build it. The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of the Rivers Institute, filling the lobby with soft gold light that shimmered across the marble floor. Olivia stood in front of the newly installed display case at the entrance, her reflection mingling with the framed photograph inside. It was the same photo that had once been torn and nearly lost during the break-in, now restored and placed at the heart of the building. In it, her father smiled beside the prototype that had changed the world. Beneath the frame, an engraved plaque read, "Robert Rivers, visionary, teacher, father." For a long moment, Olivia simply stood there, her fingers resting lightly against the cool glass, her chest tight with emotion. The building around her hummed with quiet activity. Researchers passed through with notebooks tucked under their arms, greeting her with respect and warmth. Elijah rolled up beside her, his eyes bright with the same wonder she felt. He told her that the first phase of the new project was ready for testing, and that Dr. Shaw had already assembled a team to begin replication trials. Olivia smiled and said it was time. Together, they entered the laboratory. The room gleamed with polished metal, the air alive with the faint hum of machinery. At the center stood the modernized version of her father's design, sleeker, smarter, but true to the original heart of his vision. Olivia placed her hand on the glass barrier surrounding it, feeling the faint vibration of power thrumming beneath her palm. She whispered that he had done it, that they had done it. The technicians nodded, waiting for her signal. She gave a small nod in return. The machine came to life, coils spinning with perfect harmony as a soft light bloomed at its core, bright and pure, casting gentle halos on the walls. The room filled with awe. It was silent except for the low, melodic hum of creation. Rhea stood in the doorway, watching, her face illuminated by the glow. She lifted her camera, capturing the moment that would become history's image of renewal. Olivia stepped back, her heart full and steady. The light reflected in her eyes as she thought of her father's words, the ones he had repeated so often that they lived in her like a second heartbeat. Light is not meant to be hoarded, it is meant to be shared. When the machine stabilized, the room broke into applause, but Olivia remained still, her eyes glistening. She wasn't thinking of applause or victory. She was thinking of a kitchen table cluttered with blueprints, of a man laughing as he drew circles on cereal boxes, of a child watching with wonder as he dreamed of changing the world. Now that dream had found its way home, she exhaled slowly, a single tear slipping down her cheek, and whispered, "Thank you." The future had begun, and it was radiant. If Olivia's story moved you or reminded you that truth can rise from even the quietest voices, take a moment to give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts below. Your support helps us keep telling stories that prove courage does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly and still changes everything. Make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next story that might spark something in you. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that no matter how small they feel today, one act of bravery can rewrite an entire future. Thank you for being here, and for believing that light always finds its way home.